Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has extended South Africa's national state of disaster by another month to expire now on the 15th of April. The country would be on now 25 months under the state of disaster since it was first placed on lockdown at the end of March 2020. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization Africa has said lockdowns should be reserved for exceptional cases when there is a danger of a severe variant to give governments time to put response measures in place. Professor Alex van den Heever, a comprehensive social security and health policy specialist, joins us now to discuss this. Prof, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning, and good morning to your listeners.
Gosh, were you as many of us were, hoping that was the end yesterday and sort of taken a little bit by surprise when they extended it for another month?
I wasn't surprised that they had extended it because they hadn't really done the work to transition out of the Disaster Management Act. There are potentially some regulations which you want to use to enhance the National Health Act's potential to address epidemics and pandemics. And there is also the need to transfer the regulations from the Disaster Act to the Social Development Act, Social Assistance Act, which deals with the Social Relief of Distress Grant. So currently that is enabled by the Disaster Management Act and not the Social Assistance Act. And I think that there are complications in the in transition there. What government can do, though, is it can remove all the unnecessary restrictions that it's applying now while it sorts out the regulatory issues. But I think that there are serious concerns that if you gave some of these powers to the Minister of Health, that we could have a Minister of Health shutting down the economy. So how you frame things in another act is really important and requires quite a lot of consultation.
What's taking so long, though? I mean, this is, like we say, we've been, under a lockdown now. Well, I mean, a lockdown, it is a lot less than it has been. But, I mean, this is 25 months now. And surely we had the foresight to look ahead and say, OK, well, we have got, this 350 Rand has been around for a while. And surely this should have already been sort of, worked on as to how we will now move forward. But it seems that this is taking far too long.
I think there are squabbles happening within government itself. So in the case of the SRD, it's sort of fairly well known that the Minister of Finance and the National Treasury officials were totally opposed to its extension. And as a consequence, there's a question as to whether or not there's agreement within government as to what the new regulations would be. And that might be slowing things down. There's also a requirement for consultation, which wasn't a requirement in the National Disaster Act, which people were effectively introducing measures by decree, and that has to stop. But the simple issue that you've raised, which is, shouldn't all of this have been done timeously? Well, yes. There's been a considerable amount of time to sort out many of these details, and government should get its act together. It does need to deal with the health aspects. It does need to have a proportionate response now to the level of the epidemic that we have, but I do think we should distinguish between what can be done in terms of the National Disaster Act to eliminate unnecessary restrictions and the enabling of new provisions in other pieces of legislation. I think that the two are distinct issues. We could eliminate most of the unnecessary restrictions already, even without even maintaining the national state of disaster.
So let me just understand this correctly. So we speak about the fact that mostly under this, what you're saying is it's mostly got to do with the social distress and the relief grants. Anything else, though? I mean, sometimes we're led to believe that, we need to wait and just see how the winter goes, and if perhaps there is, another variant that comes, and then it'll be really difficult to implement things if we've taken ourselves out of a state of disaster. Then what would we do? And, these are the kind of narratives that are also being thrown at us so that we sort of think, OK, well, maybe that's a logical way of thinking. But I don't know. Perhaps you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, so firstly, I don't think it's just because of the Social Relief of Distress Grant. I think that the issue was that they wanted to have some of these provisions they've got in the NDA in the National Health Act. And the problem there is that you might be giving too many powers to a Minister of Health.
Indeed.
So think of a national lockdown being introduced, level 5 lockdown being introduced by a Minister of Health on their own. And so you've got to be very careful about what powers you give to a Minister of Health, and whether or not it's in regulations, and whether or not you need to change the enabling provisions in the Act to do anything. So that, I think, is part of the difficulty, and it should have been considered well quite long ago. So I think that those are the complications.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they have any impact on whether or not we reduce restrictions right now to the level at which they should be. And I think that even if we would, aside from the social relief of distress grant, if we did eliminate the National Disaster Act's impact at this point, it could always be reintroduced if there was a real crisis. So there is a question as to what the correct strategy should be going forward. We are going to go into a fifth wave, but it's unlikely to be cause severe illness to the extent that the original first 3 waves caused. And that really means that we're in a very different stage of the pandemic at this point. It won't be eliminated, but a lot of the severe illness would have been eliminated, and certainly people have had access to vaccines, even if they haven't taken them up.
Yeah, and herd immunity. I mean, that we do know that a lot of South Africans have had this coronavirus, whether they know it or not, and that's the reality. In terms of now, we move to court, and this is where AfriForum are coming, and the DA we hear, and a lot of political parties saying that this is just a power grab by the ruling party, is that they do not want to let go of power, and this is all that's all about. There's nothing more to it than that. Do you agree with them? I mean, do you think, not that you're a lawyer by no means, but I mean, given the facts of, what it is we're looking at in terms of the pandemic, health-wise, legislative-wise, do you think AfriForum have a case here to call this null and void?
I don't agree with this intervention, because I think it's the National Disaster Act is going to be it's going to be removed. The state of disaster is going to be removed within a month or so. So the extension, it's probably going to be removed to the next extension date. So I'm not sure whether it's worthwhile to have court applications. I think that the issue really is to talk about where the restrictions should be until that point in time. And we should be very, very careful about considering the regulations and any legislative changes that are coming in. But I doubt that it would succeed. That would just be my point of view, personal point of view, not as a lawyer. I don't think it will succeed, because there are possibly legitimate reasons to just hold out, and they could be made in court. And I don't think that enough of a case could be made. I don't think it's a power grab. I think that it's largely government not having got its ducks in a row in time. I don't think that's a sufficient reason to go to court.
Yeah. Let's be frank and talk about the wearing of masks, the social distancing, the sanitizing, the not having large crowds together. I mean, yes, we know that it certainly may have helped during the different variants that we had, and especially in the beginning when we had no idea what was lying ahead of us. But as it stands right now, we see so many countries have said, forget the masks. I mean, obviously you wear it at your own disposal, if you want to wear them or not, and perhaps indoors. But outdoors and those kind of things, you can lose the masks. I mean, what are your views on this?
Well, my view is pretty much the same as I think some that have been communicated by a number of the scientists that have been interviewed, and that is that we're at a stage now where we have to move back to normal. People are going to get infected, but they're not going to get severely ill. So certainly outdoor mask wearing makes no sense whatsoever. Many of our prevention interventions didn't necessarily have much of an impact in any case. And the real intervention that was of substance was the vaccination program. So we're at a point now where we've got to normalize life. And as part of normalizing life, you are exposed to routine infection. And now we've had a very substantial proportion of the population who's been infected, reinfected, and vaccinated multiple times. So at this point in time, we're probably in the best position that we can possibly be, in the position that we will effectively be indefinitely into the future. So there's no real point in trying to prevent infections at this point in time, it won't make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Mask wearing can be at people's own discretion, in my view, and certainly masks outside and mask mandates make no sense at this point in time. We really need to normalize now.
Who are government taking advice from? I mean, we've spoken to, just in the last 3 days, 2 days, at least 3 different scientists and those in the medical profession, and every single one of them have had the same answer as you, and yet we get a different decision from government. Who are they listening to?
Well, it's difficult to know what kind of conversation they're having. And as I say, a distinction can be made between the restrictions and the ending of the state of disaster.
Yeah.
We can eliminate a lot of the restrictions, even if the state of disaster remains in place as a precautionary measure for a period. I don't think that it has a lot of value at this point, apart from the fact that you may want to transition this social relief of distress grant. Mm-hmm. That's about it. Apart from that technical reason, we need to move on. And I think that the question now is, first of all, what about the restrictions? And secondly, do we really need to hold up the end of the state of disaster, apart from the social relief of distress grant, for the transition of the health regulations? The health regulations can always be reinstituted if it's a pandemic level risk. And then you prefer to have a subcommittee or a committee of cabinet making a final determination on restrictions, not a single minister. I think that's highly problematic, where you concentrate power to that extent. So I think that we don't really need to, I can't really see a configuration in which we would have some of the provisions of the Disaster Management Act in the National Health Act. I can't really see it. I think we always, if it's a disaster, we have to institute the National Disaster Act and have a proper governance framework around it, not a single minister.
Yeah. The fifth wave, you mentioned it loosely, that, you know, and we've been hearing very slowly a couple of predictions that fifth wave will come. It may not, depending on if there is a new variant, be as harsh as the previous ones we've seen. What are signs telling us? I mean, do you think, I know APSA put out something saying that it could be as early as next month, that we should already start seeing a fifth wave coming in. Do you think that's possible? What is the data showing us?
Well, yeah, you can't see a lot in the data because it kind of has to start to happen before you recognize it. But looking historically, we've had a pretty regular pattern in South Africa in which the waves start to pick up in sort of May and peak in July. And in December, it picks up in sort of late November, early December, and concludes during January. So it sort of peaks late December, early January. And that's kind of very regular. And it's probably due to a lot of behavioral patterns that we have. And so I expect we will have that wave. The question is whether we will see future waves in the way we've done in the past, because it's quite likely that routine testing is also going to diminish, because we don't test routinely for flu. You only test if you're a severe case in hospital, and you really require it for the purposes of a diagnosis, not just to generally know that you have a disease that is infectious. And so that will fall away. We won't see the waves in, wave 6 and 7 and 8. We won't see them, but they will probably be there, as is the case with flu. But that's what we're moving toward. So the fifth wave will probably occur during the process of May and peak in July, but severe illness will probably be significantly reduced. It's not entirely likely that a new variant is going to cause severe illness. And the situation we're seeing in China and Hong Kong is different to South Africa, because their levels of infection and sort of not herd immunity, but immunity against severe illness is lower in those settings, because they try to prevent all possibility of infection happening. And so there's still quite a large population susceptible to severe illness. Yeah. But South Africa didn't manage prevention terribly well, and people have either been infected or vaccinated. And so we've now built up a degree of immunity from severe illness, not from infection, but from severe illness.
Yeah. Vaccination. Let's sort of focus on that now. We've seen a little bit of a dip in the vaccine uptake. Some questions that people ask, obviously they're new variants, this evolves and vaccines change. Do they, or is it pretty much so the same recipe? Some people may be waiting for, a different form of the vaccine to come, or are they kind of the same even if, you just go ahead? Because I know we've got a lot that are expiring right now. Would you, obviously you do recommend, as most medical practitioners do, go and get vaccinated, but getting booster shots, having this vaccine now, taking it, is that right now one of the only mechanisms available to us? Everything aside, the non-interventive ways like your masks and all of that, that can help us through this?
Yeah, this is the best protection, and I would certainly recommend that people get the booster shots the moment they're available. And if you're mixing the different vaccines, so you're getting J&J and Pfizer, it's shown to have a slightly more positive effect on protection. But down the line, we will probably have some updated vaccines to address infection from variants. But at this point in time, there's no evidence that shows that the vaccines that have been developed to date are not having an impact on severe illness. They all appear to be. So of all the variants, including Omicron, they are effective. Not necessarily against infection, but certainly against severe illness. So they're definitely worth having. And for those people that have been vaccinated and have been infected, they actually have boosted protection. So the Omicron wave actually had a positive boost effect on protection against severe illness as well. And that's also becomes part of the reason for arguing for a greater normalization. We're actually stopping people from being infected and building up immunity. So provided we've got protection against severe illness for people who are high risk through vaccination, it's probably better to let natural immunity build up.
Yeah. Final question. If you have been vaccinated but you haven't gone for your booster, are you still covered? Or does it last for only a small amount of time to have these vaccines?
No, you will still, all the evidence suggests that people are still protected. The booster just provides an additional level of protection. And as a precautionary measure, certainly if you're high risk, I would get it, but and I certainly am getting it. It's better to get a vaccine when it's available than not to. And the reason is purely for the severe illness issue. What will wane after about 5 to 6 months is going to be protection against infection. But the protection against severe illness is long lasting, even for those who've been fully vaccinated but not boosted as yet. So it's just additional protection at this point.
Prof, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Comprehensive interview there. It really was, just covering a range of issues that we've seen developing and, hopefully answering a few of your queries as well. Comprehensive Social Security and Health Policy Specialist at Wits School of Governance, Professor Alex van den Heever, discussing the effectiveness of lockdowns in curbing coronavirus transmissions, the extension of the state of disaster, as well as fifth waves, when we can expect them, and the vaccinations. So there you go.